All right, let's dive into The Watcher. You guys shared this article about like a family in Westfield, New Jersey, right? And they get terrorized by anonymous letters. It all happens after buying this like dream home.
Oh, yeah. It's a wild one.
It really is.
Really is.
Yeah, so we're going to try and unpack, why this story like captivated so many people and I guess just dive into all the crazy details.
Yeah, I think what makes this one so fascinating is that you have this contrast, right? You have the setting and then the events. So Westfield is a very affluent town.
Mhm.
I think in 2014 it was ranked like the 99th richest city in America.
Wow.
So you think, safe, idyllic. This is the place to be.
Right.
But then you have this family's dream home becoming like this source of fear and paranoia.
Yeah.
And like what really gets me is that they never even moved in.
Yeah, that's the crazy part. They
Right.
never even moved in
The letters, they got so creepy that they abandoned the house before they even really like unpacked.
before they could unpack. It's just it's mind-blowing. You would think a place like Westfield would be the last place for something like this to happen,
You
right?
would think.
Yeah. But the fact that they never even moved in is just so unsettling.
Totally. I think that detail really highlights um, the power of the unknown,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So imagine knowing someone is watching you and is privy to all these details about you, about your family, and they're making threats, but you have absolutely no idea who they are.
Right.
That psychological pressure. I mean, how do you even deal with that?
You can't. You can't.
Oh,
Absolutely. So let's start, with the family. The Broaddeuces.
okay.
Derek and Maria and their three young children, they were thrilled about this house, 657 Boulevard.
Hey.
Maria especially, she grew up in Westfield. So it was like, it's come home. It was
Right.
their dream home. It was a fresh start. But just days after closing on the house, Derek finds a letter. And it's addressed to the new owner. And things take a dark turn pretty quickly.
So how does the letter start? I mean, what's the tone?
So, I mean, from what I've read, it starts off almost welcoming, right? Like, congratulating them on the house.
Uh-huh.
But then it shifts and it becomes increasingly possessive and really menacing.
Okay.
The Watcher talks about the house calling to them and mentions, like, their family history with the house, going back generations. And it ends by asking, "Why are you here? I will find out."
That's creepy.
It's like a classic horror movie trope, right? Like you have that seemingly innocent welcome and then it turns sinister.
Right.
But I think what takes this to another level is like the level of detail that the Watcher includes. Like they mention Derek's car, they mention the contractors who were working on the house at the time, and most disturbingly, the children.
The children. So this is beyond just like get off my lawn kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
This is something else.
This is something else entirely.
Yeah. So what was their reaction? I mean, what did they do at that point?
So Derek, he immediately contacts the police, right? Like this is not okay. But they're baffled. They tell them to keep the letters quiet, even from their neighbors,
Oh, wow.
which just creates this atmosphere of suspicion.
So they can't tell anyone. They can't even warn the people around them.
Nobody.
Nobody.
That's a difficult situation. I mean, from the police perspective, they probably want to avoid panic, right?
Right.
And they probably want to protect the integrity of the investigation.
Right.
But, I mean, their advice, it just creates a whole new level of anxiety for the family.
Absolutely.
Now they're living in this community where everyone is a potential suspect.
Right. Can you imagine trying to like make friends at a neighborhood barbecue?
I know.
And all the while you're thinking like, is this the person who's sending the letters? It's impossible.
Impossible to relax.
Impossible to relax. And then, as if it couldn't get worse, before they even move in, 2 more letters arrive.
And each one is more disturbing than the last.
So the letters are getting progressively worse.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are they still signed the Watcher?
Signed the Watcher typed.
Okay.
And filled with like even more specific details. Like it shows that the Watcher is actively watching them.
Actively watching.
Yeah, they mention things like the kids' activities, like the renovations being done on the house. It's clear that this isn't just some random like prankster, right?
Right.
They're invested. They're invested in the house and they're invested in this family that's moving in.
Okay, so there's definitely some kind of personal connection here. It
Yeah.
sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that stood out to me is that like the Watcher seems to be frustrated with like the changes that they're making to the home.
Oh, interesting.
They write about how the renovations are, destroying the house as it was supposed to be,
Yeah.
and, they're revealing a really, really strong attachment to the property. It's almost like they see themselves as the protector of the house, you know? And the produce is like, these intruders?
Absolutely.
Wow.
In another letter, they even single out one of the daughters, who they saw painting, and they ask, is she the artist in the family?
Oh my God.
It's a chilling reminder that they're constantly observing their every move.
That's terrifying. I mean, this level of detail, that's what makes these letters so unsettling, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just vague threats, it's the intimate knowledge of the family's routines and the house itself that creates this feeling of inescapable surveillance. Like you're being watched no matter what you do.
At this point, the police investigation isn't turning up much, and the
Right.
Broadduses make this heartbreaking decision to not move into their dream home.
Mm.
Can you imagine having to give up on your dream home because of something like this?
That's devastating.
Yeah.
It's completely understandable given the circumstances,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the fear for their children's safety, I mean, that outweighs everything. But, giving up the house, it doesn't end their ordeal.
Right.
It just marks the beginning of a whole new chapter in this really bizarre story.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the Broaddus, they're in this impossible situation now.
Yeah.
They can't live in their dream home. The police investigation is going nowhere, and they're basically surrounded by potential suspects.
Right.
And they don't even know who to trust at this point. What do you do when you can't even trust the authorities
Right.
to protect you?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, in this case, they decided to take matters into their own hands.
Of course.
They hired a private investigator.
Okay.
And get this, they also hired 2 former FBI agents.
Wow.
One of them was even the inspiration for Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs.
No way.
Yeah. So they're pulling out all the stops here.
Oh, yeah, they're not messing around.
Nope.
You mentioned earlier that the police kind of advised them to keep the letters quiet.
Right.
Did that make their private investigation even harder?
Absolutely. I mean, it created this atmosphere of secrecy and suspicion.
Right.
That kind of permeated all their interactions with everyone in Westfield.
Mm.
They couldn't openly discuss their fears. They couldn't seek help from their neighbors. I mean, they risked further scrutiny or even accusations if they did.
It must felt so isolating, like they were battling this invisible enemy all alone.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Did their private investigators uncover anything helpful at all?
Well, they explored every angle,
Mm.
Remember how I said how meticulous and detailed those letters were?
Yeah.
Well, they brought in a handwriting analyst to try and create a profile of the watcher.
Interesting. I've always wondered how accurate handwriting analysis is, actually. What kind of things can you learn from someone's handwriting?
Well, it's a bit of a controversial field. Some people, they swear by it. Others see it as pseudoscience.
Right.
But the basic idea is that, your handwriting, it can reveal subconscious personality traits.
Okay.
So in this case, the analysis suggested that the watcher was likely an older person,
Yeah.
someone who, double spaces after periods.
Okay, like an older typing style.
Yeah, exactly. So
Sure.
maybe someone who grew up before computers were really common.
Right, right.
Yeah, and that could also explain the more formal, almost old-fashioned tone of the letters too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The analysis also noted a surprising lack of profanity,
Interesting.
despite the anger and the threats in the letters.
Hmm.
So this suggests, a more controlled and calculated individual rather than someone who's prone to impulsive outbursts.
That makes them even scarier in a way.
Yeah.
Because it's so deliberate,
Right.
methodical.
Yeah, they're carefully plotting every move.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did the investigators have any suspects?
Well, Westfield was a hotbed of rumors and speculation at this point.
Right.
I mean, everyone was a suspect, from the disgruntled realtor who lost the sale
Right.
to eccentric neighbors. Some people even suggested the Broadduses themselves.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Some people just couldn't believe that something this creepy could happen in their idyllic town.
Right.
So they accused the family of faking it for, attention or financial gain.
That's awful.
It is.
They're already going through this terrifying ordeal, and now they have to deal with accusations and judgment from their own community.
It's a classic example of victim blaming.
Right.
Instead of offering support, people kind of turn on the victims because
Uh-huh.
it's easier to believe in a hoax than to acknowledge that something like this could actually happen in their own backyard.
It's easier to dismiss it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The article mentions that the local newspaper, the Westfield Leader, didn't really help the situation either. They published these anonymous quotes from neighbors that were like questioning the Broadduce's motives.
Oh, man.
And that must have like fueled the fire even more.
Right. I mean, the media plays a powerful role in shaping public perception, and in this case, I mean, the coverage really contributed to the Broadduce's isolation and the erosion of trust within the community.
Right.
Imagine being constantly scrutinized, having your every move questioned, and facing accusations from people you thought were your neighbors and friends.
It's like something out of a psychological thriller.
I know. It's really unsettling.
But while all this was going on, the Broadduces were still, like, trying to find the Watcher.
Right.
The article mentioned that they kind of zeroed in on the family next door, the Langfords.
Okay.
What made them suspicious?
Well, a few things. The Langfords, they had lived next door since the 1960s. And remember, one of the letters mentioned the Watcher's father watching the house in the 60s.
Right.
The Broadduces also noticed that the Langford's property, it had one of the few clear views of the easel
Right.
where the daughter was painting, remember?
Right.
Which the Watcher had mentioned seeing.
Okay.
So, it does seem like a lot of coincidences
It does.
pointing in their direction. But wouldn't the police have already looked into these details,
Yeah.
before ruling them out?
You would think.
You would think. But remember, this whole investigation, it's just been plagued by missteps and dead ends
Right.
from the beginning. Plus, the Langfords, they were a bit of an unconventional family,
Okay.
especially one of the sons, Michael.
Okay.
He was known for his eccentricities. Some neighbors even called him Boo Radley.
Boo Radley.
Yeah, because he rarely left the house.
Ah, so his, like, strange behavior made him an easy target for suspicion.
Exactly. And the Broadduces, they shared their concerns with the police, and Detective Lugo, he brought Michael Langford in for questioning.
Okay.
But like everything else in this case, it led nowhere. Michael denied any involvement.
Okay.
And despite some initial hints from Lugo that Michael's story kind of matched details in the letters, the police eventually cleared the Langfords.
Another dead end.
Yeah.
But the article mentioned DNA evidence emerged at some point, right?
Yes. And it kind of threw another wrench into the investigation.
Okay.
They found female DNA on one of the envelopes. And this shifted the focus to Abby Langford,
Okay.
who's Michael's sister. She's also a real estate agent.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe she was angry about missing out on a commission.
Yeah.
Who knows?
It's a plausible theory.
Right.
Did they ever confirm if it was her DNA?
The police managed to get a DNA sample from Abby,
Okay.
but surprisingly, it wasn't a match.
Oh, wow.
The Langfords were officially ruled out. Okay.
So, once again, back at square one.
So the mystery deepens.
Yeah.
At this point, the Broadduces must felt so incredibly frustrated and defeated. What did they do next?
Well, they continued their own investigation, but, with the Langfords out of the picture, they were kind of grasping at straws.
Yeah.
They even considered some pretty drastic measures,
Okay.
like hiring a hacker to break into their neighbors' Wi-Fi networks,
Whoa.
hoping to find some incriminating evidence.
They're taking it to another level.
Yeah,
It shows how desperate they were for answers.
right.
But, I mean, I got to ask, isn't that illegal?
It definitely crosses some ethical and legal boundaries.
Right.
But, when you feel like you've exhausted all your other options and you're living in this constant fear, it's easy to see why someone might, resort to extreme measures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that this wasn't just an abstract mystery like for the Broadduces. This
Right.
was their life, their family's safety on the line.
Right. They were willing to do whatever it took to protect themselves. Did the hacker idea lead to anything?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of their efforts, it turned out to be another dead end.
Mm-hmm.
And just when they thought the case couldn't get any more complicated, they discovered that another family on their street had also received a Watcher letter
What?
around the same time.
Oh, my God.
Unfortunately, that family had thrown the letter away,
Okay.
but its existence just further muddied the waters.
So the Watcher might have been targeting multiple families.
Right.
That expands the scope of the investigation so much.
It does, yeah. It makes it even harder to, like, pin down a suspect.
Right.
Exactly. And just when you thought it couldn't get any stranger, Detective Chambliss, who had taken over the case, he stumbled upon another potential suspect.
Okay.
He discovered a young man in the neighborhood who played a video game character named the Watcher.
Whoa! That's almost too much of a coincidence.
Right. It seemed like a promising lead, especially since Chambliss theorized that the female DNA on the envelope, it could belong to the suspect's girlfriend.
Right.
You know, she might have licked it shut.
Okay, yeah.
They attempted to interview him, but he failed to appear.
Oh, of course.
And with that, the investigation stalled yet again.
So all their efforts, the private investigators, the handwriting analysis, the DNA evidence, even the video game connection, it all amounted to nothing.
Yeah.
Did the Broadduces ever find any peace? Were they able to escape the shadow of the Watcher?
Well, that's where the story takes an even darker turn. After years of silence, a fourth letter arrives. And this time, the Watcher takes direct aim at the Broadduces.
So we left off with the Broadduces, hitting all these dead ends in their search for the Watcher, and now, years later, a fourth letter. What did it say?
This one was different. It was addressed directly to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The tone was angrier, more personal, and there were even some veiled threats, like referencing things like car accidents and fires.
It's like the Watcher was escalating their campaign of terror, making it clear that they were still watching, still waiting.
Right. And the letter specifically mentioned the Broadduces' legal battles and their struggle to sell the house.
Right.
So, showing that the Watcher had been following their every move this entire time.
Yeah.
Remember, this is years after the initial letters. So this wasn't just some, like, passing obsession.
Right.
This was deep. This was a deeply rooted fixation.
It's almost like the Watcher wanted to make sure the Broadduces knew that they hadn't won. That even though they had, moved out of the house, they were still living under this cloud of fear and uncertainty.
Right.
Did the police take, this new letter seriously?
Well, the Broadduces hoped that this new letter would reignite the investigation.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it didn't lead to any significant breakthroughs.
Of course not.
Despite their best efforts, the police were still unable to identify the Watcher.
So they were stuck with this house. They couldn't live in it, a stalker they couldn't identify, and a community that largely blamed them for the whole ordeal. What happened next?
Well, they tried everything to get rid of the house. I mean, everything. They lowered the asking price. They considered renting it to veterans. They even proposed tearing it down and dividing the lot.
Wow.
But the stigma of the Watcher was just too strong.
Right.
Imagine trying to sell a house with that kind of history. I mean, who in their right mind would want to live in a place where they might become the next target of this mysterious tormentor?
Nobody would want to, take that risk.
Right. It wasn't until 2019, 5 years after they bought the house, that they finally found a buyer.
Wow.
They ended up selling it for $959,000.
Okay.
Which was a significant loss from the $1.3 million they paid for it.
Wow, that's a huge financial hit. But I guess at that point, it was less about the money and more about just getting out from under this nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. But even selling the house, it didn't erase the emotional toll that this whole ordeal had taken on the family,
Right.
They still lived in Westfield. They were constantly reminded of what had happened.
It must have been so hard to move on, especially when, they were surrounded by the same people who had doubted their story and accused them of making it all up. Did they ever find any closure?
Well, that's where the story takes another unexpected turn. On Christmas Eve, several families in Westfield received anonymous letters.
Okay.
But these letters defended the Broadduces and criticized those who had been most vocal in accusing them of, faking the whole thing.
It's like a copycat Watcher emerged, but one who is on the Broadduces' side.
Right, and it created even more confusion and suspicion in Westfield. I mean, people were now wondering who was sending these new letters, and were they somehow connected to the original Watcher?
It's like a real-life mystery novel. Like, with all these twists and turns, did they ever figure out who was behind these new letters?
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The article reveals that it was Derek Broaddus himself who wrote those letters.
What?
Yeah. Driven to desperation by the constant accusations and judgment, He decided to fight fire with fire.
Wow, that's a shocking twist. I mean, I can understand his frustration, but like using the same tactics that had terrorized his family just seems like such a risky move.
Right. It was definitely a controversial choice. And it really raises questions about how deeply the experience with the Watcher had affected him.
Right.
Some might see it as a desperate attempt to reclaim control,
Yeah.
while others might view it as a sign that he had been, pushed to his breaking point.
It makes you wonder how you would react in a similar situation.
Right.
Would you be able to resist the temptation to fight back, even if it meant like resorting to the same tactics that had harmed you?
It's a tough question.
Yep.
The Broadduce's story really highlights uh, the complex psychological effects of fear and uncertainty.
Right.
They were victims of this relentless campaign of terror.
Yeah.
But in a way, it also turned them into perpetrators,
Right.
albeit in a much less sinister way.
So ultimately, the Watcher's identity remains a mystery. But it feels like they achieved their goal in a way.
Right.
They instilled fear, they destroyed the Broadduce's dream, and they sowed discord in an entire community.
And the fact that the mystery remains unsolved, it just adds to its power. You know,
Yeah.
it serves as this chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we can never truly unmask.
Right.
It forces us to confront our own fears, our suspicions about, those around us, and this unsettling possibility that darkness can lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic places.
What stands out to you from this deep dive? Did anything surprise you or change how you think about this case?
I think the Watcher case is just this fascinating study of how fear can grip an entire community. It turns neighbor against neighbor,
Right.
and it creates this climate of suspicion and paranoia.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the digital age, where we're constantly connected and information is readily available, some mysteries, they just remain impenetrable, leaving us to grapple with unsettling questions and lingering doubts.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us into the mystery of the Watcher. We hope it provided some insights into this bizarre and unsettling case. Until next time, sleep tight and keep an eye on your mailbox.